Highlander-sponsored cultural workshops with the theme of singing for freedom. There were several goals intended as it related to African American culture and folk ways. But to the erection of a song that inspired, a song that was taken originally and then it was transformed in the very midst of them as they shared it. Horace Watkins and others emerged as song leaders and organizers, writing songs, using songs as a method in terms of tactic, encouraging African Americans as they sang to register to vote. Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, oh, I'm gonna let it shine. Well, this little light of mine, oh, I'm gonna let it shine. Well, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, well, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, well, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, everywhere I go, well, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, everywhere I go, well, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. All in my home, I'm gonna let it shine. Well, all in my home, well, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, all in my home, well, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Light of freedom, and I'm gonna let it shine. Well, I've got a light of freedom, and I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, I've got a light of freedom, and I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, everywhere I go, well, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, everywhere I go, well, I'm gonna let it shine. We're gonna let it shine. We're gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Well, I've got the light of freedom, and I'm gonna let it shine. Well, I've got the light of freedom. Well, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, I've got the light of freedom, and I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it This may be my last time. Oh, this may be my last time. It may be my last time. I just don't know. This may be my last time. This may has a way of being a defense. Song has a way of lifting, even in the very saddest of hours. But also there's some songs that we can contribute that will keep us moving, keep us going, keep us headed in the direction for victory. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. We gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, walking up the freedom lane. Let's do it again. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, oh, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. We gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, walking up the freedom lane. Let's put our hands together. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Well, well, ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. We gonna keep on, well, keep on, well, walking up the freedom lane. Ain't gonna let segregation turn me around. Sing, turn me around. Whoa, turn me around. Ain't gonna let segregation turn me around. We gonna keep on, well, keep on, well, walking up the freedom lane. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Well, turn me around. Come on, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. We gotta keep on, whoa, keep on walking up the freedom lane.
I'll make this quick, although I've got about 10 days. I'm Tim Tyson. But my wife and I were down in Birmingham, Alabama a few weeks ago for the Civil Rights Store. And we went to Can you hear me now? There you go. We were down into Birmingham, Alabama a few weeks ago. Went to Birmingham 16th Street Baptist Church where those 4 little girls were bombed in 1963. And they had a videotape, and they played the song that you just did in the basement of that church. Brought back some powerful, powerful memories. Well, Tim grew up, actually he was born in Raleigh. His mother was a school teacher and his father was a minister, Methodist minister. And he eventually went to Oxford. In 1970, there was a black man killed, and he wrote about that in a book called not The Blood and the Till, but the other one, Blood Doesn't Sign My Name. And he's had an illustrious writing history, to say the least. Those 2 novels are incredible. He's one of the most talented writers, I think, in America. He went to UNC Greensboro, ended up at Emory, graduated from down there, eventually got a PhD from Duke, and has been teaching and writing ever since. I think it was 1994. Speaking of Emmett Till, I don't know if you've been to the Legacy Museum or not, but they have a picture of him in that cute, hat and everything from Chicago. And you open it up and see his face after he was smashed in by those crazy folks down there. At any rate, I'm not going to spend more time glorifying you because I know you don't like that. But your mother's very proud of you. She told me to tell you that. Tim Tyson.
Good evening. Can you hear me? We'll work on it.
Got to speak into the mic.
Right. Right. Well, I've actually got a microphone on the lapel. It's supposed to. Well, you know, the machines are against us. We know this.
You gotta turn the mic off. Turn the other mic off.
Then we just need to get your preaching voice.
I learned to teach at the University of Wisconsin, which has about 50,000 students. Believe me, I can project that we need to. I want to thank all those with the North Carolina Voter Project that made this gathering possible. We could switch mics. If need to. Okay. In a state where 25 out of 100 eligible voters are not registered, and over 2 million registered voters did not cast a ballot in 2024. NCVP is mobilizing citizens through technology and education. Randomized control trials prove their cost-effective success. They're worthy of your support. And I want to thank my dear friend and co-teacher of 20 years and now co-author Mary D. Williams for pulling us together in song. She can take us places where mere words can't go. Now, before I really get started, I want to ask you to do something. It may seem a little crazy, but trust me, it'll work out. You know probably some of the people here, but what I want you to do is to look around you and find someone you don't know and introduce yourselves and maybe tell each other what you're doing here, or just a sentence or two anyway. And then we can sit back down and get down to business. Okay, well, many of you Raleigh folks may know my parents, especially if you're of a certain age. I want to thank my mother, Martha Tyson, for enduring many things we need not dwell upon right now, and for her decades of service to the public schools during some rough years. One day in her 4th grade class, Mama noticed the absence of one of her most unruly students and asked if anybody knew where Catherine was. Another girl answered, "She's in the hospital. They're taking her independence out." My parents laughed about that for years at the dinner table. Part of, I think, teaching us that you don't let anybody take your independence out. My late father, Reverend Vernon Tyson, served Eaton Street United Methodist twice during more than 5 decades as a preacher in these parts. Daddy grew up devoted to the teachings of Jesus, especially those related to love and mercy and equality and our obligations to the poor and marginalized. From his first appointment in 1953, he advocated racial equality and justice. Not as popular a position as you might guess. In 2013, at age 83, Vernon was arrested at the North Carolina General Assembly in a Moral Monday protest against assaults on public schools, voting rights, and equality for LGBTQ citizens. Daddy didn't just preach on love, he acted on love. When one of us children was headed out the door, my father would often say, "Remember who you are and whose you are," which is most of what I have to say this evening. My father's 5 brothers and their father were also Methodist preachers. My grandfather, great-grandfather, and on back for 8 or 10 generations were Free Will Baptist preachers. I only mention this by way of urging the North Carolina Voter Project to do a little more careful background check before inviting somebody to a podium. I aim to keep this talk to 20 minutes, but I just want you to know that I bring an immense genetic burden to this task. I can't speak to the background of our special guest speaker, Reverend Elijah McDavid III, except to say that he's a renowned missionary Baptist preacher and community leader in Minneapolis with deep roots in the South. And as you know, you can take the preacher out of the South, but you can't take the South out of the preacher. I say that because, as I said, you really need to be careful who you invite near a podium. So y'all may as well settle in. We now confront a shameless assault on history and memory, even the existence of facts themselves, seeking to make us accept the sugar-coated and fundamentally false narrative of our national history. MAGA is making a fervent attack on high school teachers and librarians who try to teach the truth about history. Books that MAGA fanatics ban include To Kill a Mockingbird, a timeless work of conscience, No Truth Without Ruth, a children's book about Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and Maya Angelou's classic I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, a novel about a young black girl attacked by an older man, a girl who years later discovers that love for herself, the kindness of others, and the ideas of great authors like William Shakespeare allow her to live free instead of imprisoned by her past. The novels of African-American writer Toni Morrison are special targets, even though she is one of the few Americans, like Faulkner, Hemingway, Steinbeck, who ever won the Nobel Prize for Literature. MAGA rejects anything about or by African Americans as DEI, critical race theory, or cultural Marxism, none of which they would know if it fell on them. They falsely brand books they don't like as pornographic. All this, of course, is just political cover for attacks on books that make you think, especially about our beautiful, terrible, and complicated actual history, told in all its sparkling complexity, tangled in its painful webs of contradiction. History that is not indoctrination, but democracy, that leads us toward belonging.
Here, here. Yeah.
Abraham Lincoln once said to an audience, how many legs does a dog have if you count the tail as a leg? When the crowd answered 5, Lincoln told them that the proper answer was 4, because calling the tail a leg don't make it a leg. It baffles me that authoritarians believe that ignorance of the past will somehow exempt them from its consequences. Like hiding the empty cake plate will help you lose weight. Which I know not to be true. There's no future in forgetting our past. History that flatters itself cannot be a guide for our feet. James Baldwin writes, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced.
Amen.
The forces that defend democracy are not merely having a bad election cycle. And here in America, right now, we've seen our worst history come off its leash as our government has fallen into the hands of billionaires and bandits and shameless liars, driven by an ideology that exalts cruelty. We have witnessed the public demolition of our federal government, including programs whose loss will cost the lives of millions of children around the world. The decimation of our health and research infrastructures, attacks on universities, nonprofits, and legal firms who refuse to bow down to Trump's ideological bombast. A pardon for the January 6th criminals, even those who used bludgeons and bear spray against police officers. Deportations of migrants into foreign gulags without due process. Disrespect for democratic allies, but support for authoritarian regimes like Russia and Hungary, and imperialist threats against peaceful allies like Panama, Greenland, and Canada. We've seen an irresponsible Congress allow a renegade regime to usurp their constitutional mandate to appropriate funds. The administration has even cut off funds already appropriated by Congress and unleashed an unhinged tariff war, even though the Constitution specifically gives Congress the sole authority to administer tariffs. A few days ago, the White House Chief of Staff announced the administration's desire to suspend habeas corpus, which would deny the legal right of any person, citizen or not, to challenge the legality of their detention. But we cannot afford to ignore that the resistance has already had many significant victories. Public protests have driven the president's polls lower than any predecessor at this point in his term. He's been compelled to cave on Chinese tariffs after being proven to be lying about China calling him to beg for relief. Another desperate and dishonest about-face. He was recently confounded by Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney in the Oval Office and condemned by the New York Conference of Catholic Bishops in a single week. Lawsuits have delayed or denied some of the regime's most reckless and ruthless plans. Citizens have begun to rise up by the hundreds of thousands. Our own Bishop William Barber was recently arrested at the U.S. Capitol for praying in a Moral Monday protest, illustrating the hypocrisy of an administration that has prevented any number of right-wing extremists to pray there. In 2 weeks, on January 2nd, Bishop Barber will convene another Moral Monday protest at the Supreme Court, saying this is not a time for only partisan response. We need a moral movement. You can learn about the June 2nd protest and even get a place on the bus by searching North Carolina Poor People's Campaign. We also have to pause here to celebrate the long-delayed acknowledgement of Justice Allison Riggs' victory in her election to the North Carolina. This is likely to make it a little harder to steal fair elections in the future. She did that. We did that.
Yeah.
Incidentally, Justice Riggs is the only politician I can remember hearing use the word love in a speech. Dr. King explained in Montgomery the crucial relationship of love, power, and justice. Power without love is reckless, abusive, and morally bankrupt. That sounds familiar. Love without power, though, is anemic and sentimental. King explains that we must harness our love to power, and that will bring us toward justice. We liberals have a special affinity for love without power. We prefer to be good than to do good sometimes. But there's an African proverb that says, "We'll know how the story goes when the fight starts." Dr. King writes, "We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and violent acts of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. Amen. For love to prevail, the ballot is necessary but not sufficient. We must also join a movement large enough and strong enough to transform this country. Never in our history have changes as large as the ones that are necessary now come about strictly by the ballot or only by one group. In the Jewish tradition, synagogue translates as coming together, which is exactly what we need to do." In the women's suffrage movement in the early 20th century, hundreds of women defied presidential orders to stop their protests and went to jail to illustrate the righteousness of their demands and the tyranny of their opponents. Millions more joined the national movement and held bake sales to finance the struggle and forums to educate the public, worked in electoral campaigns and lobbied Congress, and finally won the vote for women. Now, men, including co-founders of the NAACP, organized the Men's League for Women's Suffrage, which marched at the back of suffrage parades and provided crucial support for the movement. Rabbi Stephen Wise, one of the founders, said, "We have learned to be auxiliaries. Just as they did back then, we can learn to work together and win." The Civil Rights Movement won secure access to the ballot for black Southerners, won an end to formal legal racial discrimination through landmark victories in court, nonviolent direct action campaigns, electoral strategies, public education efforts through churches and the press, and massive protests that showed the country and the world the legitimacy of their demands and the scope of their support. Don't listen to anybody who tries to disparage protests, saying all those people walking around with signs just need to go vote. By what reasoning could they assume that protesters don't vote? Or that voters don't protest? This is just an excuse for bystanders. We need to organize a many-sided movement, powerful enough to defeat the far-right extremists. All of our efforts to pursue justice need to persist, but we must also ally ourselves with the larger movement. Our adversaries are shrewd enough to work together. We have to be shrewd enough to work together. Whatever issues we pursue on our own, voting rights, environmental protection, women's rights, criminal justice reform, and so on, we must understand that we all have exactly the same enemies. And I mean exactly. Everyone seeking to suppress the vote is also fighting us on the environment, is also attacking LGBTQ dignity, is also attacking women's rights to control their own bodies, is also trying to build private prisons instead of public schools. To turn back the extremists, we need the power that comes from a broad-based movement. Less about Republican and Democrat, left and right, and more about a moral vision of right and wrong. As good Bishop Garvey often said. See, in unity is where our love gets transformed into justice. We have to have an electoral strategy, a litigation strategy, a protest strategy, an education strategy, to make a realistic stand against the forces that would end American democracy. And that takes power. Now, where does our power lie? We don't have billions of dollars. We don't have an army and don't want one. I mean, we don't. Violence is something that once you take up, I'm not saying that there's no time when you don't have to fight. I'm just saying that violence creates barriers between people that take generations and generations to heal, if then. So if you want a society worth living in, we have to find other ways. What we do have is what in the Philippines, when they were overthrowing the dictator back in the 1980s, they called it people power. As Rabbi Heschel said, we must learn to pray with our feet. In Catholic activist and writer Dorothy Day's words, our movement must become a revolution of the heart. A revolution of the heart. Love is the spiritual glue that holds us together. All faith traditions honor love for humanity, even though they don't always live it. Activists who don't work from a faith tradition at all, nonetheless labor in the service of love. Environmentalists don't care so much about their canoe trip. You know, they're worried about the children being poisoned downriver and the marginalized groups who are targeted by polluters. Racial justice must be central to our work because it is the enduring signpost of American conscience. But racial justice warriors fight so that all our children can grow up in a democracy in which all people matter. Women's rights activists devote themselves to a world in which little girls do not grow up under a shriveled sky because of vicious stereotypes. LGBTQ organizations do their work devoted to a world in which children don't grow up under a ruthless stigma because of who they are and how they love. Our movement must be that space in which we understand that it is our birthright to love one another despite our differences. Radical black lesbian feminist poet Audre Lorde writes, "You do not have to be me in order for us to fight together. I do not have to be you to recognize that our wars are the same." When we meet and see each other and act upon our highest values, it may not instantly change our adversaries, but it will change us. When we see each other in large numbers, it will help us understand that we're far from alone. Our movement must invite all of us to a place of belonging, a spring garden where we can grow our common future. When people stand together for the highest values that they know, they become bound to one another, and they embrace a new and better sense of themselves. The young folks will raise their children differently and pass along our democratic legacies. All of us will find the courage to defend democracy in public. And all of us will find our place of belonging. You know, protesting in good company is an excellent treatment for sorrow and loneliness. And don't tell anybody, but it's fun too. I remember marching in Washington one time, and it was a very hot day, and everything moved really slowly. And somebody started a cheer that spread through the march, and it said, "We're tired, we're cranky, we don't like the government. We're tired, we're cranky, we don't like the government." Many years ago, a reporter asked A.J. Musty, who was president of the War Resisters League, "Do you really think you're going to change the policies of the country by standing out here alone at night with a candle?" Musty replied, "Oh, I don't do this just to change the country. I do this so the country won't change me. When I'm willing to cross the line of how much I think I can love, I'm changed. When I'm more in touch with what I love than what I fear, I take a stand. My prayer is that more and more of us, on behalf of all the children, will use the energy of a mother to touch the seeds of courage and love within us for the sake of the world. In our hearts and in the living ingredients of our own lives, we already have everything we need for this struggle. The U.S. Constitution, God's strong hand on our backs, the memory of the movements that made our country a democracy, the memory of the movements that struggle for it still, the common moral values that we learned at our parents' knee. I always wonder, when some people in this town, I hear them talk, and I always think, did your mama really get down beside your bed at night and pray with you and say, "Son, if you could just destroy the public schools, your father and I would be so proud"? I just don't think so. We'll stand together. We will not submit. Remember who you are and whose you are. Don't let anybody ever take your independence out. Stand up and join this movement so that our children and grandchildren can one day come home to a country, to a new country. To Poet Langston uses America that never has been yet and yet must be. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Tim. And of course, Mary, for your singing and getting us off to such a great start. I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. And I have the privilege of introducing our last speaker, Minister Elijah McDavid III. And I'd first like to recognize his parents, if they can raise their hands, because Lynn and Elijah are here in the audience. They've joined us from South Carolina and North Carolina, respectively. So their family and their legacy provide Eli long roots in our area. Lynn went to Duke. Elijah went to to North Carolina Central, and my husband and I intersected with Lynn and Elijah and their son Eli approximately 30 years ago in the DC area. And I share that because my kids went to school with Eli, so it's a pleasure to introduce him. Eli went on to Morehouse and then Divinity School at Columbia. But he's always been a bit of a public speaker. He honed his skills and his faith at the Alfred Street Baptist Church in Alexandria. And I like to think that he got some of his self-assuredness and his patience and maybe a little bit of a sense of humor from being in a very close, loving neighborhood in Arlington. And I know you all know what I mean by that, you have kids. I also want to say in introducing him that I had to go back and reflect. My children, everybody, marveled at Eli and held him in high esteem. But one of my kids, when Eli's friend Drew was in the 2nd or 3rd grade, maybe 4th, he said that he liked McDavid, was the smartest kid in his class. And, and I said, why? And he said, because he thinks with his heart and his head. And I thought later that it was a great comment for somebody, great perspective for somebody who became a minister. But I thought since then, that's really important for civic engagement, because I think the very essence of democracy is being able to look at being inclusive, and to look at our neighbors with their heart, and then think of solutions with their head. Eli is coming to us today from Minneapolis, where he is at the Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church. He's been there ministering in the community there, having arrived shortly after George Floyd's horrific murder. And in that capacity, Eli has been part of the faith community there, working to try to bring transparency and healing and a path forward after that horrific tragedy. And I realized I couldn't mention George Floyd without noting, we're talking about all these other social justice issues that are important and books, without noting that we're at the 5th anniversary of his death. And I think that, that sort of does epitomize some of the challenges in faith and democracy we're facing when you see a tragedy like that play out in public by a public safety official. And having flagged that, I have to also note that the people in Minnesota did not fail to show up at the polls. In 2020, and again in 2024, they showed up in droves. They were, I would have expected the community might have had a lot of, might have felt disenchanted, certainly felt fatigued and some apathetic toward government, but in 2020, more people showed up to vote than 2018. And last year, last fall, Minnesota was the 2nd highest turnout for people who were registered to vote, and it was way in the 90s. And I mention that because North Carolina was 73% of registered voters came out. And so we were barely a passing grade. And I share that with you to sort of challenge all of us, because that's where the North Carolina Voter Project is. And with our faith and democracy, I'll just say quickly that our faith and spirituality do represent the power and purpose of us as individuals. And our democracy represents the people. So I'm looking forward to Eli's message for us individually and collectively. And again, I thank you for coming tonight.
Well, good evening, you all. It is quite an honor to be here tonight. I am grateful to the North Carolina Voter Project, to Lenny, and to Betsy. As you heard, I've known almost all my life, and grateful for all of those in this space who are responsible for my being here. Grateful for all of you who have dedicated yourselves to the work of organizing, especially in this season, but recognizing that organizing is something that takes place across generations and through many localities. And I thank you all for the variety of ways that you are helping to reshape this painful moment that we are in. As has been shared, I am grateful to be back in a place that I consider to have great roots in. Both of my parents went to college in Durham. I'm grateful for them driving up from Charlotte to be here with me tonight, and grateful for the ways in which I got to spend some time summer growing up in Hillsborough, North Carolina, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and Spartanburg, South Carolina. So it just feels good to be home and to be able to de-thaw from the ice cold that I experience in my new adopted home in Minneapolis. I thank you for allowing me to be here. As Betsy mentioned, I was called to serve a church in Minnesota just a few short months after George Floyd's murder. And I was prepared to go back tomorrow as we prepare for these 5-year anniversary events. We are thinking so deeply about the way we sit in the backlash to that moment. A moment that was ripe with so much opportunity, so much powerful reflection, organizing, and progress. And yet now we sit in the cruel backlash of it. And so I ask that we would all begin to reflect and think about where we were in that pandemic summer and the opportunity that was ours to be forced into a place of real reflection and critical dialogue. And I pray that we might be able to get back to that moment, that it might recenter us in a beautiful and profound way. This was the part in my notes where I was going to apologize because I was told I was in a nonpartisan space, but then I just met Tyson tonight. And so I was going to say, grab your oxygen mask and your seatbelt buckle, and buckle up, but you all have already experienced some profound riddance. Would you help me thank Tim one more time as we honor him for showing the connections between history and our present moment. I've been asked to highlight the faith side of how faith connects to democracy and our spirituality. And I'll start by saying this: everyone has faith in something. You have faith that when you tap your card on the terminal, that money will be accepted. You have faith that when you get home from a long day of work, your spouse is going to ask, "How was your day?" You have faith that when you type your friend's name into the phone, that it will call your friend and not some other random set of digits. We all hold a faithful confidence in the value of our money, our technology, or our relationships. And then for many of us, we also hold faith in a divine or higher power. Traditionally, our relationship with this deity has informed how we relate to the rest of humanity. That the moral compass we receive from above ought to inform our ethical behavior here below. Because I want to please XYZ deity, I choose to be mindful of that deity's instructions on how I should treat other people. The God or the sacred scripture that I subscribe to recommends that I act with kindness and justice and compassion towards my neighbor. Therefore, I ought to let love guide my words and my deeds in my daily living. And if a community full of people is committed to this collective moral work, then we should all be able to clearly say, faith has benefited the community. We can even say that faith has supported our democratic values. Because if democracy is simply, as the Greek word root would suggest, ruled by the people, then a society that has greater reverence and respect for people should indeed have a healthier democracy. That's ideally how things should be working. But as the theologian in the room, I will say what isn't being said often enough. Most people, whether they have a faith or not, whether they subscribe to a particular brand of religion or not, most people are not started in that place of reverence for their neighbor. More often than not, our words and our deeds are springing from places of economic interest, career goals, and social trends. And then people will try to manipulate faith to fit to whatever agenda is necessary in order to achieve these other primary goals. Faith becomes the tool or the lever I pull in order to get the things that I actually want. And when faith is corrupted in this way, we are no longer invested in how to reverence, support, and affirm other people. But instead, we create these hierarchies, and we even sometimes use faith to justify why these people deserve more and those people get less. So faith no longer teaches me why I have to share with them. It now justifies my desire to take from them. Faith no longer convicts me of my moral responsibility to care for that group, but now it becomes the lens through which I view my group as the victim. Because if I'm not seeing the economic progress I want to see, if I'm not experiencing the social progress I feel worthy of, then I am no longer invested in my religious obligation of looking out for my neighbor. Now I need a faith that just looks out for me, myself, and I. Lenny, I've got a lot of interfaith colleagues in Minneapolis. We gather once a month for breakfast, and my imam and rabbi friends, they will offer a whole lot of insightful critiques of the ways their faith have been distorted. Their voices should be in this conversation tonight, but as a Christian pastor, I'm only going to critique the folk in my camp tonight. Is that all right? What I have noticed is that much of the dialogue attached to Christianity in our present moment does not have any sense of reverence for the neighbor. And because we no longer have that sense of mutual care and responsibility, faith is not helping to fuel democracy like it should, but now instead, faith has become a pawn of autocracy. Faith has become dangerously personal and very little social relevancy. I'm borrowing this term, reverence for personality, from the 20th century theologian Howard Thurman. Thurman, the Boston University dean, was a mentor and spiritual guide to Martin Luther King and countless others who led during the classical era of the civil rights movement. And Thurman taught extensively on the importance of having reverence. Reverence simply means seeing the beauty and the dignity of those who are most neglected by society. Thurman argues that the gift of the Christian faith is that Jesus is forcing us to see beyond our socioeconomic boundary lines and care for people that society has led us to believe we're not responsible for caring for. Jesus knew early on that people would try to limit their concept or understanding of the neighbor. In Luke's gospel, in the 10th chapter, we find his classic illustration of the Good Samaritan. And we have to remember that that Good Samaritan story is only laid out as a response to a question that an attorney raises. A lawyer, being a lawyer, raises the question, well, Jesus, who is my neighbor? You've given me all this admonition to love others as I love myself, so tell me, who do I really have to be responsible for? And in that moment, in that illustration, Jesus reaches across social customs and religious barriers and economic status to show the man that yes, the wounded traveler lying by the side of the road, that is your responsibility too. Go and help him. Go and serve those who are overlooked and neglected. Go out of your way to care for someone you could ignore, because sitting at the heart of your faith is an obligation for you to have reverence for your neighbor. I would argue, Mary, that our democratic institutions are crumbling in a very similar manner to how we have witnessed the collapse of our faith institutions. The human tendency to yearn for power has distinguished our democratic or spiritual responsibilities of having compassion for the other. if you cannot see beyond yourself, it becomes easy to cut essential services and to gut life-saving programs and to demonize marginalized communities. Dr. Aubrey Hendricks, who taught at Columbia while I was there, he argues, as many have, that it was Emperor Constantine's embrace of the Christian faith in 312 that actually killed Christianity, because it forced the religion to align with oppressive policies rather than stand against oppressive policies that were advocating for the neighbor. Amen. Dr. Hendricks says that there is little question that the acceptance of the unchristian ethics of political oppression, social domination, elitist privilege, and concretized hierarchy into the faith and the theology of the church has largely turned the message of Jesus into something so counter to what he lived and died for that he would surely stand against it if he were walking the earth today. The social domination and power hoarding of the Christian nationalist movement does not reflect in any way the values of those who pioneered the faith. And so what I am working towards in Minneapolis, what we're trying to do at my church called Fellowship, is ignite what we would call a moral homecoming. We're trying to reclaim and rescue the brand of the religion that we say we care for. And we do that moral homecoming by rewiring our ethics, our priorities, and our budgets so they might reflect a deeper sense of care for the community. Because we'll never be able to protect immigrant populations, to build enough affordable housing, to advocate for women to receive the equal pay they deserve, or to remedy our health care or educational disparities. We'll never be able to do any of that until we feel a profound sense of moral obligation, until we come back and return to those values we claim to hold dear. And on some level, it's not even a sense of moral obligation to our neighbor. It's really a sense of moral obligation to our children. Yeah. I remember we were prepping for this event, and Betsy asked me to think about the long-term effects of the moment we're in right now. We often talk about the short-term effects, and that is real because they are devastating, but what we really need to do is wrap our minds around the long-term effects. As a faith leader, I am ultimately optimistic about our future. I have to be in order to be a spiritual person. But the truth is, on any given Wednesday like tonight, my heart breaks when I consider how poorly we've dropped the ball. What I mean by that is that my heart is encouraged whenever I get the chance to get my permission slip to sneak out of our adult sanctuary and walk over to our children's church and our teen church facility. I love going there, in part because kids are so much more fun than sleepy adults. But also because the creativity, the profound theological questions, their unstifled optimism, their joy is contagious. And so when I go to those places, I am excited about our future. And so I say that to be clear tonight. The problem is not our young people. The problem is the mess we're leaving behind for them to clean up. Amen. The environmental disasters, the absurd economic disparities, the morally abhorrent behavior that we uplift and exalt. It is our lack of ethical imagination that is going to leave Generation Alpha with so much less opportunity and safety than even we were afforded. This is the problem we need to consider as we think about what it means to have a moral homecoming. It's a problem that I face each and every day when I pull up to work. Speaking of reverence for our neighbors and moral responsibility to our children, when you pull up to my church, you'll notice there is an elementary school right across the street from our church. Love that school, love the teachers and the staff there. Here's the problem that we are reminded of daily. Less than 30% of the third graders in that school are proficient in reading. Less than 30% of the third graders are proficient in reading. And so we're quickly working with Carnegie Learning and their artificial intelligence solutions to try to develop some individualized lesson plans that can begin to catch up on that work. But it is an uphill battle. It's a resource-intensive effort. Because when you are that far behind, that early on, catching up is quite the ordeal. And so I tell my church that we have to have the faith to motivate us to have reverence for each of these beautiful kids and these children, because if not, that prison to school that school to prison pipeline that we've been talking about for the last 20 years, that pipeline is only going to get wider and wider. And don't get me started on who benefits from all of that cheap prison labor. That's the conversation that we need to be having. It's centered around our moral obligation to our children. And so at Fellowship Minneapolis, we often teach the story from the 17th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. We teach that story because it is one of the moments in Scripture where Jesus is at his angriest. We often used to sing when I was growing up in church about the lowly, meek, and mild Jesus. Matthew chapter 17 is a great contrast because Jesus is heated. He goes off. And somebody would ask, well, why is Jesus so angry? It's because the Father has brought his young, troubled son to the disciples, and the disciples have been unable to figure out how they can help this young boy. And Jesus is fed up. He throws up his arms. He says, I don't have time for you. He calls them a faithless and perverse generation, and he even says, how much longer should I put up with you? It's worthy of us to know in our faith that Jesus is at his angriest when we fail the next generation. That is why we need a moral homecoming, because there are long-term devastating consequences that we might never be able to fully repent for if we don't do what's necessary now to help those coming behind us. We need a reawakening of our values, a shared sense of compassion and understanding, a willingness to lean into what is hard and what is heartbreaking. Because listen, I don't always like going around talking about devastating disparities. It doesn't feel good, but we have to do it. We have to have the conversation because apathy is a road that will quickly lead us to authoritarianism. That's why I'm grateful for you all tonight. That's why I'm grateful for the North Carolina Voter Project. Because we cannot allow apathy and disillusionment to guide our steps in this moment. We have got to let go of the idea that you can't talk about religion and politics at the dinner table. No, you definitely should. In every sphere of influence you have, I encourage you to raise the question, who is my neighbor? How do I reverence them in the fullness of their personality? And perhaps examining my faith through the lens of my neighbor will lead me to a more holistic understanding of my role in this democratic project. We have to consider how our attitudes toward what's going on around us is shaping the future that we stand in very soon. I'll leave you with this. I was traveling because I'm not used to Minnesota in the cold, cold winter. And so February, I get out of Minnesota. I snuck out of the church. I went overseas to travel, and it was a long trip. We had some flight delays. I was tired when I landed. Got to immigration and customs enforcement, handed him my passport, and the man was looking at the passport, looking at me, looking at the passport, looking at me, and he wasn't going to let me through. He just kept looking at me and looking at the passport. I said, sir, well, can I come in the country, or are you going to kick me back out and send me home? He looked at me, he said, the person in the passport photo and the person standing in front of me are two different people. I said, what are you talking about? The passport should say Elijah McDavid III. I'm Elijah McDavid III. I'm pretty sure that's my passport I handed to you. He said, no, the person in the passport photo, the person standing in front of me are two different people. He said, in the passport photo, I see a bright, beautiful smile. I see someone who's happy to be here. And in front of me, I don't know who I see. But he doesn't look quite happy to be here. And I was convicted in that moment as a faith leader because I realized that in the few months between when I took that passport photo and now, the same things are true. The same opportunities, the same potential, the same possibilities of God are still standing in front of me. But somehow I chose in that moment to let another disposition and another countenance take over me. And the man almost could not recognize me because of how I chose to show up that day in that moment. I believe we are called in this moment to take back our countenance, to choose how we show up. We can lean into the apathy and the disillusionment, or we can choose to show up in such a way that says, I am determined to seize what could be possible in this moment, and to make the best things happen. Because I know that my neighbor needs me, and my country needs me, and ultimately my faith needs me to show up as the best version of myself. Thank you, and God bless.
Am I speaking into it? We're going to adjourn. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for coming. We would love your support. One of my favorite contributors is a man who gives $10 a month. I wish everybody would do that. It would be fantastic. I love that person. But anything you can help us out with, we appreciate it. We're not a partisan organization, so we don't get these big pools of money.